when you flex your tricep, if I can show you an example, if I'm flexing my tricep, do you see it? It's impossible to flex one hand without flexing the other two.
So hey guys, this is Shoaib and I'm back with another episode of interviews. And today I'm honored to have Jonathan Park for another interview. And and this interview is going to be particularly on how to actually work out during this lockdown period, and what your diet should look like and what to do after the lockdown. So, sir, I want to start this interview.
Okay.
I want to start this interview like what should someone do during this lockdown when it comes to exercise and diet protocols? What should they do?
All right. Let's start off with the exercise first. Are we presuming that they have equipment?
If they
Limited equipment,
don't have any equipment,
or no equipment whatsoever? No equipment. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, one can work the whole body without equipment. Is it as good as not having equipment available? And when I say equipment, I mean basic equipment such as barbells and dumbbells and pull-up bars and dipping bars. Obviously not, because depending on what your goal is with regards to training, if your goal is to get stronger, and I'm not necessarily talking about bodybuilding, or for that matter, weightlifting or powerlifting, where obviously equipment is paramount, even just the basic equipment. But if your goal is to get stronger, you have to add more resistance to the muscle. And the only way one can add more resistance to the muscle, to put on muscle size, to get stronger, is by adding load. It's very difficult to add load when you don't have any equipment available. So one has to learn how to improvise. With the addition of, if you're fortunate enough to have somebody to assist you, a family member, a sibling, you could have them add resistance whilst you're doing movements such as a push-up, whereby they press down on your back. If it's somebody who's a little bit smaller, or if you happen to be super strong, they can sit on your back. Okay? You can vary the angles of the way you push up. For example, you could do it flat on the floor. You could have your hands higher than your feet, whereby you can simply use 2 stools or step-up stools, which you can get in any hardware store. And you can also have your feet higher than your hands. So your feet would be up on a small wall, or on a coffee table, or on a sturdy chair. So you can angle, therefore simulating a flat, an incline, and a decline position. Okay. And you could slow the tempo down on movements to add more resistance. In other words, we all know that in a negative range of motion, you're much stronger because of gravity pulling you down than you are on a positive range of motion. So, for example, on a push-up, that would be the lowering portion of the movement as opposed to the raising portion of the movement, the pushing. Now, the Nautilus principle, invented by Arthur Jones, who was a genius, who had several degrees in physiology, was based on the negative phase of the movement, the lowering of the weight, the lowering of the body, because that is stronger, and he would have one count 4 on the lowering portion. So you resist gravity. That's what really makes you stronger. Normally the concentric, that's called the eccentric, by the way, the lowering part. The concentric is the contraction part, like a push in a chest press, a raising up in a squat, a lifting up in a curl. A tricep would be extension. So those are the positive movements. And that's really what gives you more of what they call the pump, because you're putting blood in the muscle. So my feeling is, if your goal is to maintain, let's at least say maintain muscle to a degree, and to maintain strength, is one should actually emphasize the negative and the positive range of motion. In other words, not only to count 4 on the negative range, but to add a little bit more resistance by going slower on the positive range, to get more muscle isolation per se, to feel the muscle more, to increase the so-called pump, if that is your goal, to maintain muscle. Also, the feeling of the pump is a very satisfactory feeling, because it makes you feel that you've worked out. It doesn't necessarily relate to an increase of strength, but it relates to the feeling of satisfaction of you've worked the muscle in a way whereby you feel that you've accomplished your goal. So I would emphasize both right now with lack of equipment. In other words, I would focus on a 4 count on the way down. I'd focus on a 4 count on the way up. Or alternatively, if you have somebody helping you with resistance on a push-up and they're sitting on your back or lying on your back, you could work the upward portion a little bit more explosively. But I think working both concentric and eccentric, you encompass all. So that would be, for example, for chest. For legs, yes, having a smaller person, a younger sibling, sit on your back like a piggyback, or your shoulders, providing you have good stable balance and you're not near any sharp objects on the floor. Should the person happen to fall and you lose your balance, perhaps do it best if it's next to a bed or some cushions on the floor, mats on the floor. The same thing can be applied. With biceps, you can get, and shoulders, you can get large water jugs with the handles on, full of water, to add more weight. So you can simulate a bicep curl. You can simulate a shoulder press. You can simulate tricep extensions, sitting down or lying down. So there's many ways to train without equipment. Of course, for abdominal work, you don't need equipment. The floor is adequate on a mat. So there's no excuse to not be able to train. And in my opinion, Civic, gyms are nice because you have the variety. But, excuse me, I'm not a huge fan of machines per se. Machines meaning, I'm not talking about a lat pull-down machine, because that's a cable, and of course that's a mainstay. But I'm talking about machines where you fixed in one position, such as a Smith machine, which I, for one, think is overrated because you fixed. And if you look at anybody who's performing a squat in the correct manner, or a bench press, incline press in the correct manner, or a shoulder press in the correct manner, it's not completely vertical, straight up and straight down. There's a curve. And by using a machine, i.e. a Smith machine or any others where you fixed and in one position and therefore can only work according to the way the machine is designed. So you, in fact, have to fit into a machine, which is pretty much a one-size-fits-all. Yes, seat positions are adjustable today. Back pads are adjustable today. You know, the width of perhaps handles are adjustable today, but you're still fixed, which for me places more stress on the joint because you can only work in such a way. Whereas if you used dumbbells or single handle on cables with an adjustable pulley that moves, you can find the range that is most comfortable to you. So in other words, if you're on a fixed machine, if you have instability in the joint, it's going to create even more instability in the joint. Because as I said, you have to adapt to that machine. It's like the machine is not built for you. It's built for everybody. And I don't believe in a one size fits all because we're all a little different. We know that there is only one origin and one insertion of a specific muscle. So forgive me if I've been redundant and brought this up in the past, but this theory of, well, you need to work the muscle from different angles. I don't buy that. I don't buy that because there is only one origin and one insertion. So you can work it from different angles to hit different parts of that particular muscle. But we all know, if you've trained long enough, the bicep has two heads, the long head on the inside, the short head on the outside. And in some rare cases, some people have three heads, but it's very rare. Now, if you need to emphasize one head more than the other, yes, you can change the positioning of your hands or your arms. But it's very hard to work one head of the bicep and negate the other head. It's impossible. Same thing would be said for the tricep. You have three heads. We have the medial head in the inside towards the elbow. We have the long head, which is above the medial head, and we have the lateral head on the outside. Now, one can work one head more than the other, but when you flex your tricep, if I can show you an example, if I'm flexing my tricep, do you see it? It's impossible to flex one head without flexing the other two. You can't do that. You can just emphasize more that specific head of what you need, depending on what your goals are, by changing the hand position of the exercise. For example, if I wanted to work more the inside medial head, I would do a reverse grip. So if I wanted to work more the outside, I would do an overhand grip. And then you've got ropes. So there's many different ways. And having said that, frankly, although it's a fantastic exercise for both your pecs and your triceps, depending on the way you do it, I'm not a big fan of dips either, specifically for older people. Because, again, your hand is fixed in one position, which places a tremendous amount of stress on the wrist, elbow, and shoulders. And if you've had an elbow or shoulder problem, doing dips can actually lead to further injuries. I'm not saying dips is a bad movement. It's a fantastic movement. It's an old school movement. But if you've been around long enough and trained long enough, certainly for people 40s, 50s, 60s, I think they have to be careful with movements like that. I think they're better off using a cable unilaterally, single-handled, rather than both hands together, because, frankly, very few people know two sides of the body are the exact same in size, in strength, in appearance, and in endurance. So my preference is always to work unilaterally, independently, when possible. Because if I had to say to you, for example, I'm going to give you a bar and I want you to bench press, and I want you to bench press until you get to fatigue. So we're not going for maximum poundage. We're going for how many reps can you do. Most cases, you would find that ultimately one side after a while is going to work more than the other side. So in other words, by doing a bench press with a bar, you'll find that the strong side takes over. Now, if you're a competitive weightlifter and a power lifter, I get it. You have to work with a bar. Those guys are a lot more balanced overall than the average person in terms of unilateral strength. For the most part, they're much more equal, where one side is very close to the other. But for most people, one side's always a little stronger. So by using dumbbells or two single handles, you're much likelier to not rely on the strong side to help the weak side. That's why for me, my preference of training is, and I'm not saying negate the others, if I'm doing back work, I prefer to do a one dumbbell row. I prefer to do pull downs with two independent handles, which you can get today, as opposed to a fixed bar. So I'm working each side independently. I prefer to do a one-arm cable row as opposed to a pull down with a straight bar, a single handle. So it doesn't mean I never do the others, but 9 times out of 10, I work unilaterally as much as possible. Okay. With a squat, it's a little harder to do. A bar works best, but then some cases you have to consider if people have spinal injuries, you're probably better off not putting load on the spine. Therefore, it's probably easier if they squat with a dipping belt around their waist and stand on 2 step-up stools so they can get more range of motion when they go down, so the weight doesn't touch the floor. It gives them more range of motion. That way the load's coming from below you as opposed to the load on your spine. You know, so I think one has to take all these factors into consideration. I know I'm getting a little carried away about equipment because we're talking about not using equipment, but it's just, in my opinion, food for thought. A press up is very difficult to work unilaterally. So obviously working both hands together is better. Unless, of course, you want to lie on a bench, or if you have a ball available, just to take a big water jug and do a one-arm press and perhaps slow your movement down both ways. So there's many different ways to train. You can do push-ups on one foot, on the other foot, which will, of course, work your whole structure. That's why I like a push-up, because it doesn't just engage the chest, shoulders, and tricep, but it engages your abdominals as well, and your glutes as well. What people call core, which, if I may say, core, that term core, which has been a buzzword for the last 15 or so years, it's very common, but I think it's used incorrectly, because quite frankly, when they say core, they're referring to midsection area, lower back and midsection, but that's not core. That may be the center of your body. The core is your whole body, from fingertip to toe. That's your core, your whole body. So the word core is a little bit misused. I know what people mean, when they come and say, my doctor says I need to strengthen my core. Well, if you're doing a bench press, if you're doing a squat, you are working your whole body. Yes, you're emphasizing on a bench press more chest and shoulders than anything else, and triceps. Yes, when you're working squats or deadlifts, squats, you're working your thighs more than anything else. And deadlifts, people think it's just lower back. No. If you're doing a conventional deadlift, not a stiff-legged deadlift, you're working your thighs, very much so. You're working your glutes. You're working your lats. You're working your pecs. You're working your abs. So it's impossible not to work the whole body. That's why the three mainstay exercises, and which you can A, get stronger from, and B, gain muscle mass from, is your squat, your press, or your row. And then I would like to add with that a deadlift, because for me a deadlift, the conventional deadlift, is really like a squat where you're pulling the weight from below you, but you're engaging more lats and pecs. And even a squat with a bar, if you're holding it properly, not on top of the traps, it's got to be between the shoulder and the trap, more across the back. You're using your lats and you're using your traps. Same with a chest press. You've got to engage your lats when you press. You don't just come up relaxed. You're tensing your lats and pushing up, because the lats are in reality, you're much stronger in a pull than you are on a push. So, that's my concept of training. Also, I think if your goal is, now let's take it a little step further, is purely bodybuilding, and you want to gain muscle. We all know resistance adds muscle. But I think to do this correctly, and unfortunately, I will go out on a limb here, and I'll say that probably 80% of people who go into gyms, unless they've been training a long time and they're experienced and they're well-read and have had a lot of trial and error, 80% of people don't train properly. From the simple reasons. One is, you can learn from reading. You can learn from a book, but you have to know your physiology in order to train smartly and correctly. For example, one of the things I do on an evaluation, Civic, and this is just one of many things, I will look at somebody's biceps, or should I say arms. And if you can't see me, tell me. But for example, I would look at somebody's arms with their arms extended out to the sides. Okay. Some people, they're not able to extend the arm fully, right? There's the elbow slightly bent. That's just their structure. What does that tell me? It tells me that the bicep is short, but the tricep, the opposing muscle, is overly stretched. So, for somebody like that to do bicep work where they're not doing a full range of motion, you're just shortening the bicep more, the long head. And since the bicep is short and the tricep is overstretched, for somebody who has an arm like that to do an overhead extension where you're putting the tricep in maximum stretch, you actually can end up harming the structure of the joint, because you're putting more stress. So what would I do with somebody like that? Hey, I wouldn't let them use a bar at all, because when you use a bar, you have to stop short. Your thighs get in the way. So I would only have them use dumbbells or single handles, whereby you can work a full range, not a short range. Secondly, if I was working tricep, I would not have them do any overhead work whatsoever, because all we're doing is keeping on lengthening the tricep. I would have them doing a push down, more importantly. So I wouldn't have them do any overhead work. So these things need to be taken into consideration. Conversely, and I see this more with ladies than men, they're what we call hypermobile. My arm is pretty normally straight, but my daughter, for example, is typical of one of those people that are hypermobile. In other words, when she extends her arm, the hand is not in a straight line from the elbow, it's below the elbow. So the hand goes lower. That means she's hypermobile in the bicep. The bicep is long. We don't need to work it any longer. But the tricep is short. So for somebody like that, I wouldn't do a full range of bicep. I'd probably only start at 90 degrees and work up to there. I wouldn't go lower. But then again, I would have them do overhead extensions because the tricep is short and it needs to be lengthened. So these are just two of many, many factors that one has to take into consideration when structuring a sound and intelligent program that works for the individual. That's why I will not train anybody without doing a thorough evaluation. And I mean from head to toe, whereby I look at them standing in 4 positions, face on, backwards, and both sides. I would look to see when they stand sideways, ideally, when you stand or sit, and that's I'm talking about with good posture, your shoulder, the humerus, top of the humerus, should be in line with the ear, straight line. Many people, when they stand, they like this. And the humerus, in many people, they're protracted, they're going forward. Because most things in life, especially today, are in front of us. Okay, let's talk about just the simple things. Interaction with other people is in front of us. Working, which has become more prevalent now with the lockdown and the COVID, because people are working at home. Working on your laptop, your computer, your iPad, your phones, it's all in front of us. Okay, texting. Eating is in front of us. Watching TV, a movie's in front of us. Driving a car's in front of us. And people spend a lot of time doing these things and driving for long hours, especially in a city like Los Angeles or living in America where one commutes a lot and spend a lot of time on the freeway with traffic. So we tend to do this. So we all become a product of protraction, whereas we need to be more like this. Let me digress and go back to dips and on a stool. Ideally, unless you've trained a long time and you're very aware and you're tuned in, what happens with most people when they do dips? You see them on a bench. Look where the shoulder's facing, right? As opposed to here. That's why what I would prefer to do is take 2 single handles and do push downs this way. Okay? You want to work your chest more for dips? Take 2 single handles and do it this way. Imagine if you had dipping bars that were adjustable, which means when you come down, they come in. When you go up, the bars go out. Okay, it would be a far better movement, better on your elbows too. Okay, so you could simulate the contraction and the extension of the muscle. So one needs to take all these factors into consideration when putting a program together, when devising a program is look at each person on an individual basis. What is their structure? Are they more ectomorph, the lean marathon type of physique? Are they more endomorph, which is the opposite, the heavy obese type of physique? Or are they more what's considered the perfect physique? The more mesomorph is the muscular physique, 100-meter runner. Okay, you take most 100-meter runners, I'm talking about top level, you train them for 6 months in a gym, they could walk into a bodybuilding contest if they train that way, because they build so quickly. So the first thing to take into consideration is the structure of the individual. And may I also say that because we've all become so protracted, what does it do? You look, it's very prevalent with kids today. There's an actual condition which doctors use, which is called text neck, which is very prevalent with kids because they're all like this. And they're all carrying heavy bags with books at school. So what happens with this type of posture? First of all, you're compressing through here, which, by the way, compresses the pericardium, the heart muscle, which is no good. Number two, it compresses the internal organs, which is going to limit oxygen intake, which is going to cause problems with digestive system because the colon is compressed. Okay. If I were to, yes, I'll exaggerate to a degree, but if I were to take a deep breath in, sitting like this, okay, I'm having you look at me from the side so you can see my posture, because this is very typical today, right? If I were to take a deep breath in, listen. Do you hear it's forceful? Now, listen. Listen. Which one's getting more oxygen in? Okay.
I think
when I'm sitting upright, look at my shoulder and my ear. So secondly, because people are doing this and are protracted, you are overstretching the back and the traps. Now the traps, the trapezius muscles, is like a big triangle starting here, okay, below the ears and going down. This is considered upper traps. Very explosive, can handle load, but not for long periods. Goes down in a triangle like a manta ray. This would be around here, considered towards the base of the shoulder blades, your middle traps. So think of a sprinter with upper traps. Think of middle traps as a middle distance runner, 800 meters, combination of speed and endurance. Whereas the lower traps, the base of the triangle is purely endurance. It's a marathon runner. What we've done over time, because of poor posture, certainly in the last 20 years or so, and certainly prevalent now, which I see all the time with my older clients, I suffer from a lot of neck tension and trapezius tension and headaches. It's all because of the way they sit at work, because we've become so much more sedentary, and because of the current state of COVID, working at home. Okay, so now what you've done is you have overstretched the trap muscles and you've forced an explosive muscle into unnaturally becoming an endurance muscle. It's impossible. You could never take a 100-meter runner. Doesn't matter what level, but let's, to make it simple, say a world-class 100-meter runner, somebody who's in the top 10 in the world, who makes the final of the Olympics, okay? You could never take that runner and make him into a world-class or average marathon runner, because his physiology will never allow him to be a marathon runner. You only have to look at the physique of a marathon runner. Okay, they train short, they train explosively. Similarly, you could never take the marathon runner and make him into an average sprinter. Can the sprinter improve endurance? Yes, to a degree. Can the endurance runner, the marathon runner, improve their speed? Of course, to a degree. But can one become the other? It's impossible. It's physiologically impossible. So it's no coincidence when you see an athlete who's good at a specific event, be good at that. Do they train? Of course they train hard and hopefully intelligently and very intensely. Are they smart? Yes. To be the best in your field, you have to have some intelligence, even if it's innate intelligence in that thing. But it's not just because they train hard. And of course, the mental attitude is a prevalent factor. That's number one for me, that they're good. Because there's a lot of people who train hard. But their physiology has determined that that is what they're suited for. And you can even take a team event, for example, a rugby team or a soccer team, and you can say, why so-and-so so good playing as a defender in soccer or rugby as opposed to a forward or as opposed to a midfielder? Because they all require different things. Some require more strength, some require more speed, some require more endurance, some require a combination of both. So physiology is important. And that's why, for me to put a program together, I have to analyze, that's my blueprint, the whole body. I've had people say, I'm not interested in an evaluation because it's lengthy. It can take 2 hours. I just want to train. My response is, I can't look at you, I can't train you. And frankly, anybody who says they can train you, to me, is full of bullshit. Okay? Because how can you train somebody when you don't know the blueprint? And I've seen this happen time and time again. My trainer used to do that. My trainer used to do that. Do you know how many clients I get? And I say, okay, did your previous trainer ever do an analysis of you? No. Did they ever look at you without your shirt on? No. How do you know what that person needs? How do you know if one side's not bigger than the other? How do you know if the person doesn't have a curvature of the spine? How do you know if one side's not longer than the other? How do you know one side doesn't have more range of motion than the other? It's impossible. So that's why I say, for me, 80% of people, including trainers in a gym, they don't know what they're doing. And I'm not knocking trainers, and I'm not knocking people who train. It's important to do that. But you have to train smartly to achieve maximum benefit, maximum results, and as little as possible in terms of injury. That's why it's so important to know your physiology, or at least go to somebody who knows physiology, who studied this, because one can learn from a book. And I've said to people in the years, I've been doing this for 45 years. So who helped you with your training? No, I've just read this book and I like these exercises. Okay, very good. You're doing better than nothing. Does the book know what you look like? No. Okay. So the book doesn't know what you look like, and you see so-and-so in Flex or Muscle and Fitness does 15 to 20 sets for his triceps. Do you need that much? I mean, let's go back to one origin, one insertion. How many sets do you need? Take into consideration every set you do, you're depleting your glycogen level by 10%. Glycogen is what enables you to contract the muscle. When glycogen is depleted, where do you get the energy to contract the muscle? From the muscle itself. You cannibalize the muscle. You take it from the next available source. When that's fatigued, where does it go? Connective tissue. Give you an example. I used to be in charge of Oscar de la Hoya, who was a world famous boxer. He won 4 world titles, WBC, in the welterweight division. And we trained him, when I say me, my team, which I was in charge of, for 9 fights. In the 9 fights, he was undefeated. When we first started training with him, we gave a little presentation. And frankly, when they first wanted us, he had 3 weeks before his first fight. Now, no, I could have jumped on it and been mercenary and said, oh, yeah, I can do this, and got paid a decent amount of money for 3 weeks' work. But would I feel good about that? No, because what can I do in 3 weeks? Okay, I need a minimum of 3 months. Okay, so I said, frankly, what I'd suggest you do is go with what you have right now for the 3 weeks, because there's very little I can do in 3 weeks. I can educate you a little bit, but I don't want to change the psyche too much. You know, you got this goal, you're ready for it. Go with what you got, and let me train you for your next fight. That's the honest to God's truth. That's how I started with De La Hoya. And then I had him for 3 months, which frankly is still not enough time. But he said, is that why before a fight, I start feeling my joints are aching? I said, well, one is from overtraining, because they all tended to, especially in those days, and he was one of the first into doing strength training, because the boxers had this, and some to a degree still now, but not as much. We were like the first. Holyfield was definitely amongst the first to do proper resistance training under Lee Haney, but they had this mentality, which is very archaic and prehistoric, that weight training slows you down. And I had to argue my point and prove my point, which today, 25 years on, I wouldn't even waste my time, because I can't be bothered talking to ignorant people. They would overtrain. There was no planning of the schedule. They would spar. You have to have planning. So what did we bring to the table? Okay. Pre-fights, enough time, strength training 3 times a week, and not 3 days in a row. On the same day as strength training, you're not sparring, because that's 2 anaerobic activities in one day, 2 explosive exercises in one day. What you're doing on that day of the strength training is you're working on technique. Sparring, other days. Endurance running, not on the same day as strength training, on the same day as sparring. But having said that, most of them do too much endurance training. Whereas if you think about it, if you're training hard enough, you're getting a lot of endurance in the ring by, doing rounds and rounds. And a boxer doesn't fight at one pace, boom, 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 for 3 minutes. There's many different transitions. There's intervals. You go in, you go out. So you have to interval train. And for these boxers to, apologies, somebody's obviously trying to ring me. For these boxers who are, apologies for the interruption. Oscar and some of the boxers I worked with initially, I'm going 25 years ago, they would know one thing, going for these long runs, up and down hills. That doesn't help a boxer. That's training for endurance. A boxer needs to train explosively. So we introduced scheduling the load, strength training one day, boxing one day, boxing technique one day, stretching and recovery, all very important. Then, of course, we brought the nutrition into. It's become a lot more scientific today, and they're a lot cleverer. But we had to kind of break that mold and come up against these trainers saying, no, don't do weights, it slows you down. I don't know any physiological books that show that. I've never seen that science. And when you take into account, they've done tests years ago in the Olympics. Who are the most explosive athletes? More than a 100-meter runner is the Olympic lifters. And I'm talking even super heavyweight to a very, very heavy. But for that particular movement that they do, it's so fast and explosive, more explosive than the 100-meter, but obviously for a shorter period of time. So the nonsense about weight training slows you down, or when anybody says that to me, then I know I'm talking to an ignorant person. And as I say today, I wouldn't even have that debate. It's not worth it. I'd rather, deal with somebody who understands and is, going to use it. And that's because the trainers may very well be versed in boxing and ring strategy and know exactly what to do with that. But when it comes to the other areas of resistance training and nutrition, they're limited. For example, I saw this time and time again. The boxers would need to make weight if they're coming down in weight. So what would they typically do? They would absolutely starve themselves. Okay, and they would spit into a cup, thinking that by spitting they're getting rid of excess fluid before the weigh-in. And they would stop drinking water, which is archaic, because water is a natural diuretic. The more you drink, the more you flush out. It triggers a chemical in your brain to flush water out. We know that when we drink a lot, we flush out. So we can drown the internal organs by over drinking. But if we want to have optimum health, we should drink at least a little bit every 15 minutes, so we don't become hydrated. If you get a dry mouth, you become hydrated, because it's better for your joints, for your muscle, which is 70% plus water. It's better for your internal organs, your skin, your hair, your energy levels. So we had to change all that. And what I did was I employed a very renowned gentleman who I'm still friendly with today by the name of Jerry Brainham. And Jerry Brainham was the former science editor for Muscle and Fitness. He's brilliant, especially when in manipulating carbs and protein and supplementation, sports performance supplementation. So I hired him, and he was part of my team. And I remember the one fight, the night before the weigh-in, Oscar was 4 pounds overweight, and the promoter came to Jerry and was freaked out, was worried. How's he going to make weight tomorrow? How's he going to make weight? He should go and sit in a sauna and spit in a cup. And Jerry said, don't worry about it. The next morning, he got up. To be crude, he had a bowel movement. He made weight perfectly. As soon as he finished the weigh-in, he started eating. Not like a crazy man and just pigging out, but a good ratio and proportion of carbohydrates, healthy carbohydrates, not just junk, white, starchy carbs, and proteins, and he got the glycogen back up. He comes into the fight 4 pounds heavier. Some of them would come 12 pounds heavier. That's crazy. You put on 12 pounds in a matter of, 12 hours. That's just silly. But if you do it properly, you can manipulate it whereby you sail into the weigh-in and you put on some weight for the fight. And that's it. But what's happened in many, many cases, I used to hear, I left it in the gym. Yeah, you left it in the gym, but you also dehydrated yourself and you were finished. So all that 3 months, whatever you did training, you've just wasted by blowing your nutrition and being silly by starving yourself and not taking in any liquids, any calories whatsoever, So that was a thing that we had to change. Now, if you want me to address more nutrition, what's kind of habitual right now? People are sitting around more, watching TV more. I'm not saying everybody. Exercising less. What do they tend to eat? The comfort foods.
I think one thing is that right now, due to this lockdown and everything, people are training, but they're not getting that type of workout that they usually were used to do, and the intensity is less and everything. So people who actually was on a deficit or was on a caloric consuming more calories, I think they should be on the maintenance or something like that, because as they're not training that hard right now to maintain their muscles.
That is correct. And by eating too much in the way of carbohydrates and not putting out the energy expenditure, they are putting on weight. And the satisfying food is carbohydrates, okay? But carbohydrates are starchy, high in sugar, so we know that can lead to other things like, for example, depression. And we have to think about that. Although studies have shown right now that carbohydrates, and not in excess, do help you relieve stress because it produces serotonin in the brain, which makes you more relaxed. But you don't need to sit on TV and take a box of chocolates with you, or eat a box of donuts. You got to be smart. So if you eat frequently throughout the day, smaller meals, try not to go more than 3 hours without eating, space it out, drink adequate amount of water, you'll keep your energy level at a constant. Make sure you get your 8 hours sleep if you can, and that way you'll keep stable. So the diet is very, very important. I'm a believer that one should have protein at least 3 times a day, because protein is a natural diuretic. Protein builds muscle and helps you maintain your strength. It doesn't have to be heavy proteins. Like, I'm not a big believer in having heavy meats at night, red meats and things of that nature. At night, I'd rather have a protein that's more easily digestible. Protein shakes is another good source of protein, providing it's a good, high-quality protein shake. I tend to not be a big fan of whey protein. I tend to prefer more of a protein from a grass-fed beef. Or a pea protein if you're a vegetarian, So one can get good sources of protein, but I would stay away from the heavy proteins at night, because that's when your metabolism is at its slowest when you go to sleep. So it is very satisfying to have a big steak at night, but it sits on you. It's hard to digest, So I think you just have to be smart in the proteins that you eat. Nuts is a good source of protein. Avocado, believe it or not, is one of nature's most balanced foods. It has protein and carbohydrates and essential oils in it. So that's very good. You can get some very healthy health bars, but just make sure that you read labels. If it's got preservatives in it and artificial coloring in it, and it's got things like partially hydrogenated vegetable oil or palm kernel oil, those are not good sources of fats, because they clog the arteries. So it's just a matter of being smart. I believe in lots of fresh fruits and vegetables as well. I have a tendency to stay away from foods very high in sugar at night. I prefer to get my fruits in the earlier part of the day, because sugar that's not utilized for energy, specifically at night where you burn less calories, goes into the liver and stores as fat. So although sugar after a meal in the form of fruit is immediately used for glycogen storage, it's not going to go and store as fat. That's fine. But I prefer to stay away from foods high in sugar at night. And my preference is to have my fruit very first thing in the morning, because I feel that it helps with digestion. And some people would disagree with me, but I actually prefer to have fruit on its own first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. And before I have anything else, I wait at least 15 minutes. So I like the fruit to digest by itself. So it's a combination of, right now, being smart with your training, not overtraining. When I say overtraining, and again, I may have addressed this before in our previous interview, I think many people overtrain. do too many sets per body part, too many exercises per body part, and I go back to one origin, one insertion in the muscle, glycogen depletion. When you're a younger person and all you're doing is eating, sleeping, and training, you can get away with doing more. But more is less. And I think to do 20 sets for legs, 20 sets for back, you know, if you're not doing anything else, that may be okay. But you've got to have an awful lot of calories. And today, unfortunately, especially in bodybuilding, unless it's natural, you've got to have the right amount of performance-enhancing drugs. So I don't think the average person can do that. And certainly as you get older. I've done multiple sets in the past. My dad did it when he was younger because that's all he was doing. But as time went on, he did less. I'm at the stage now where I train, certainly on a heavy day, because I break up my cycles into light, heavy, and medium. So I'm getting all the different fibers engaged, fast twitch, slow twitch, medium twitch. It's important to incorporate all three because one of your questions is about rep range. But I have a tendency, certainly on a heavy workout, I only do one exercise per body part. And I'll only do 3 sets. I'll never do more than 3 sets on a heavy day. And my rep range, let's take upper body, will probably be 5 to 8 reps, no more. And it's only compound movements.
When I'm talking about rep range, I'm especially talking about think about right now we don't have weights. Okay. In this situation, because we don't have that type of that amount of weight and everything, we are using only body weight. So don't you think that we have to use more sets and more reps to actually train and
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. That is true. Unless you have the ability to have somebody to assist you by adding extra weight. Water bottles, whatever the case may be. So yes, right now we would have to do more reps. Change the tempo. How do you increase the attention in exercise? 1, you increase the load. 2, you change the tempo, positive and negative range of motion. 3, you change the rep range. 4, you change the rest period. Okay? Right now, because we don't have the ability to have the load without equipment, my recommendation would be far less rest to keep the intensity up, because that way at least you would get very good conditioning per se. So you won't lose conditioning. You might lose some lean muscle mass. I get it. But it's a trade-off. So I would rest less, which I tend to do anyway in my own training and with my clients, unless they're doing a heavy workout, then you need to rest more for recovery. So, you just have to work with what you have, but there's ways to do things, I mean, one can do calf raises and put, if you have somebody available, your younger sibling or your spouse or your girlfriend or your mother on your shoulders and do calf raises. Or you can do a bent over donkey calf raise and have somebody sit on your back. So there are ways to do it.
I think we can
there's some guys in prison.
I think we can also do keep a bag and have some weights with books and everything on that, and then we can actually work out. Yeah.
Of course, books is another way. Of course. Water bottles are very helpful, I find. The big gallon water bottles, and you can get various sizes. Those are helpful. Some people mimic kettlebell training with water bottles where they do a Turkish get-up with just one bottle, So, exactly. So, there's many variables that you can use. You just got to be creative, but you also have to be smart, because you've probably seen a lot of these things that are going around on the internet, on YouTube and WhatsApp, of people doing really, really foolish things and hurting themselves very, very badly, exercising at home. I've seen doors coming down where they're putting pulley stuff over the top of a door and the door lands on them, or they're putting something over a branch and the branch falls down, or guys sitting on just like these outdoor plastic chairs and they're doing shoulder presses and the chairs collapse. So I've seen a lot of people getting hurt, so you've got to be a little bit smart in the way you train. I'm sure there's been a lot more injuries right now with people training at home than normal. So, but by all means, read to get some knowledge, read a little bit about anatomy and physiology. Try and get somebody who you trust to analyze your structure. As I say, I look at everybody standing 4 positions. I look at them lying face up and face down, because the structure can change when you move. And then I even look at them walking from behind, from the front, from the sides, to see perhaps one arm swings more than the other when they're walking, which means that they tighter in the one side, or perhaps one leg crosses over more, which means that there's an imbalance with the hips and the pelvis or the spine. There could be many, many things, but you can only know this if you can find somebody you can trust to put a program together.
Actually, the problem is this injuries and everything that is happening. Actually, most of the people are trying to make it a fun thing. Like they want to be famous on somewhere, and they're making this type of video so that they can get famous. But they're making themselves injured and all those things. And I think this is idiotic to do. And they also inspire many people through their following, as much as I see.
Yeah, well, the other thing is I actually look at this too, Civic, as a positive, because it gives you another variable. Because you perhaps used to, if you've trained for a long time, training one way. But this adds another variable, another modular of training. So you can experiment with certain things and learn more about your body. One of the best ways to learn about your body I find, is if you've had an injury. Because if you've had an injury, you know exactly what the approach should be in terms of recovery. So it teaches you more. I'm not suggesting everybody should just, go out and injure themselves and be foolish. But I've found, and, if you've trained long enough and you've been active long enough and just living life, you're going to have had some form of injury or another. But I do see, even not from a stupid point of view, because it's happened with friends of mine, where they are getting injured now because they're a little bit overzealous and they're overdoing things that they haven't done in a long period of time because they can't go to the gym. Even some guys are getting injured on push-ups, So that's where the likes of myself and trainers who are educated come in to help educate people. And having said that, I would think that it wouldn't be a bad idea for a lot of people to employ the services of a knowledgeable trainer, even if it's online right now, to help them devise a program. Now, can you do an evaluation to the same extent as you could if you were to be physically with somebody one-on-one? Obviously not. But there's an awful lot of stuff you can do. For example, if I was analyzing somebody remotely, I can't take their measurements unless they had somebody to assist them, and I could explain exactly how to take their measurements. I can do certain range of motion testing, but it's never going to be as good as a one-on-one, but you can achieve an awful lot. Let's say if I'm analyzing somebody remotely, I could get a good 80% out of the evaluation, which is still better than they would have had if they didn't have any evaluation at all. And I can say to them, avoid these movements, but incorporate these movements. At least I can do that, and I could look at them walk and see what their body mechanics are like when you walk, because your structure dictates your function, how you move. So I have over the years worked with people that have been sedentary for a long period of time, have had a number of injuries. And I can tell you right now, frankly, I've worked with some people where I've worked with them for 6 months to a year without lifting a weight. because I'm preparing them, and it can take 6 months to a year, depending on how old the person is and what their limitations are and what injuries they've had and what their range of motion is like. It can take that long to be able to prepare them to be able to exercise properly. Now, what I do with them is a sense of exercise anyway, because I'm giving them movement and they're certainly improving. And I'm increasing range of motion and mobility and getting blood into the muscles and the joints. So overall, the result is good. But as I say, it can take that long before I even give them a weight to use, because I want them also to learn the mechanics, the correct mechanics, the mind-muscle connection. My son works with me. He's very, very good in terms of teaching the fundamentals of the basic movements, the compound movements, deadlift, squat, press, row. Very good at that. And he happens to work a lot with younger athletes, who many of them are overtraining. And he can take a full workout, as will I, to teach a person how to squat properly. Because people think you just get under a rack, put the bar on, squat up and down. No. There's so many things to think about when you squat properly. And I even give people a thorough leg warm-up before they even squat. And that can take 20 minutes just to do the warm-up itself before they even squat with a bar. So more of a dynamic warm-up routine, you know. So even to do a bench press, explain the mechanics. It's not just taking a bar and pushing it up and down, where you see so many people overextending and bringing the shoulder into it and taking the pec out of the movement, as opposed to pushing into the bench and keeping your shoulders back and using just your pecs. You know, a lot of people are, because of this protraction, they're overdeveloped in the frontal deltoid, because bench press is such a mainstay. Bench press, don't get me wrong, is a good movement. I happen to think it's a strength gauge and a measurer, and if you're doing it for the sport, by all means. But I also think it's an overrated movement in terms of overall balance, in terms of if you're just more concerned about how you look. Because when people do a lot of bench press, to the trainee who's not very educated, they tend to overdevelop the frontal delt and put an awful lot of stress on the lower pectorals, which I think detracts from an aesthetic, symmetrical physique. I go back. As most people know, my dad was the second man in the world to bench press 500 pounds at a body weight of 225. And he was not a power lifter, but as part of his routine, in those days, they would have to lift. And he did it without a lifting suit that they use today, without racks. They had to have two spotters on each side help. The world record was set by Doug Hepburn, who was a 275, 300 pound guy. 500 pounds. My dad did it a few days later, or 6 months later, maximum, same weight at a body weight of 75 plus pounds less, you know. But he realized at a young age, whereby he stopped flat bench pressing completely and he never ever incorporated it in his routine again, because the lower pecs are much easier to develop than the upper pecs. And he didn't want that, which you see a lot, that heavy, rounded lower pectoral look. He preferred more of a fuller upper pectoral look. Frank Zane was another one who had that wonderful balance with a square pec line and heavier in the upper pecs than the lower pecs, because it's very much easier to develop your lower pecs. More of the pec is engaged in the upper pecs. I get it if it's your sport and you're competing in powerlifting, bench press. I get it if you want to see how much you can press. I understand that, and I'm not negating it. I'm just talking purely from an aesthetic point of view.
Actually, the thing is, one of the best chests that I have personally seen in the bodybuilding scene, it's of Arnold Schwarzenegger. His chest was like on a different level at that time that I've seen.
He was very, very full. And from the silver era to the golden era, when they did a side chest which showed great pec volume and a great rib cage. As the years have progressed, when they do a side chest today, it's not a proper side chest, because a lot of the guys don't have big rib cages anymore. A lot of them don't even do pullovers anymore. It's more of an awkward looking side pectoral. But I would have to say, and that's just my comment, front on, I felt Arnold's lower pecs were too heavy, front on, compared to some of the other guys, even compared to Reg. Yeah, when he competed against Reg, he was almost 20 years younger than Reg. Reg had retired, and Arnold issued him a challenge, and he trained for 3 months. And there was a half a point separating them at an age group of just under 20-year difference. But there's a front shot where, from the front, from a symmetrical point of view, and I'm not negating Arnold, because what Arnold achieved was immense. I felt Reg's structure in the pec area was more balanced, because Arnold's lower pecs were heavy. But, pound for pound, what Arnold achieved, I don't think has been surpassed. In fact, unfortunately, I think it's gone backwards, where it took Arnold to even come out and say at an Arnold Classic a number of years ago, this has got to stop, and he had to go at the judges, because, which we discussed last time, it's gone too far. I think other than Sean Roden and Dexter Jackson when he won the Olympia, from Haney onwards, for me, the whole thing changed.
Have you looked up to Patrick Moore? Patrick Moore? Have you looked at his physique? Patrick Moore.
I can't say I'm familiar with him. You have to understand, I don't really follow too much today. I kind of lost interest in it. I like looking at certain physiques. I've seen a number of these classic physique competitors. I wouldn't be able to tell you all their names, which for me are very appealing. I think that's how the Olympians should look.
Actually, the problem is when the gut came into the introduction. I think right now I see some pleasing physiques in the Olympia are Hardy Chupin, Patrick Moore, Dexter Jackson, of course, Sean Roden there was, and from the classic physique, of course, there are all the guys don't have the gut. They actually look good.
Correct. And I think that's where it's changed for me. I may make myself unpopular. I don't really care. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not attacking any of the current bodybuilders of today. If that's the look that's required, they're doing what's required. I don't blame them, and nor am I criticizing them in terms of human beings, of who they are, because I don't know them personally. I'm just saying, for me and for many of the old school bodybuilders who I know and I'm in touch with, none of them have an interest in the look today. And some guys will say, and I've had this on Instagram, why are you hating? I'm not hating anybody. This is not personal. This is my opinion. Okay? If you don't like my opinion and you're going to criticize me for my opinion, you don't have to listen to it. I'm just giving you my opinion after seeing the sport for the last 45 plus years. I've been watching the sport since I can remember, before 10 years of age. And by the way, every contest I ever went to, I was always able to place the top 3. I would always tell everybody around me who the top 3 were. And 9 times out of 10, 99% of the times out of 10, unless the decisions were controversial, I was always right. But, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back, it's just I've grown up with it for many, many years. Today, I wouldn't really be interested in it. And I don't blame these guys, because that's the look what's required. I blame the judges, you know. So one can say after Haney, it took a different direction. It did. But again, we discussed this before. Give me the likes of Zane. Give me the likes of Danny Padilla. Danny Padilla at his best. Give me the likes of Lee Labrada, Samir Banu when he won the Olympia. Give me the likes of Muhammad Makaway.
Robbie Robinson? Robbie Robinson.
Robinson in his day was good. I always felt he was a little bit weak in the calves, you know, comparatively. Give me the likes of Bob Paris, you know, Francis Ben Fato. Those were the physiques. Even Serge Nubret. Those were the physiques that I liked, you know. Franco, not the year he won his last Mr. Olympia because he wasn't at his best.
He got injured.
You know, those are the physiques. Sorry?
Franco got injured before that win, as much as I remember. That 1980 Olympia win. Franco was injured.
Yeah. I thought Chris Dickerson, the year he won the Olympia, was very, very good too, in terms of condition. Some people will criticize his arms were too small, his waist was a little square, but he was in excellent condition, you know. But as I said last time, one of the most complete physiques I've ever seen was Danny Padilla.
What do you think?
He had everything.
What do you think about the 1981 Olympia that happened between Arnold, Frank, that controversial Olympia 1981? What do you think about that?
The one in 1981?
Yeah.
The one that Franco won?
No, Arnold won that. That was a comeback year.
No. So now you're talking about the 1980 Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, I think it's 1980. Yeah, Franco came back in 1981.
Franco went. He didn't compete in the 80 Olympia. He competed in the 81 Olympia.
I have actually confirmed.
Yeah. It caused a lot of controversy because a lot of people felt for 2 years Arnold shouldn't have won, and then the following year Franco shouldn't have won. So it caused a lot of controversy. Interesting thing with Arnold, though, he had such charisma, such stage presence that he could win on that alone. Yes, he may not have been his best, but people say that he just started to improve as the show went on, because after the prejudging, he wasn't placed first. But in the finale, when he came on stage, he was getting harder and more muscular as time went on. Don't forget, he had just finished shooting, so he didn't have as much time to spend on it. So he was also very, very, very clever the way he presented himself too. He was a master of that. He knew how to psych other people out and play with their heads. He was a true competitor. But his two best features on his physique were by far his arms, probably the best arms arguably in the world, and as you just said earlier, his pecs. So most of the shots in his posing are very clever. He would show the bicep and the pec, whether it be from the front or the side or this type of pose. Very clever. So presentation-wise, stage presence-wise, you know, nobody came close to him.
Right.
You know.
I want to.
So one has to take all factors into consideration.
Yeah. Actually, I want to end this interview by asking our last question: that what are the three best picks when it comes to bodyweight exercises?
The three best.
Yeah, your three best picks when it comes to exercise. Three best exercises that you love in bodyweight exercises.
Okay, well, going back to what I was saying earlier, you can never get away from a squat, some form of a squat. And for that matter, I would incorporate the deadlift, not the stiff-legged, because they both engage everything. You can never get away from a chest press, whatever form of chest press it is, incline, decline, flat, dumbbells, barbell, and you can never get away from a row. Barbell row, bent over dumbbell rows, one-arm cable rows, 45-degree rows from a cable. Those are the mainstay for me. Those 4 exercises. But again, each one has a variable. If you can keep with those 4 compound exercises, which incorporate every muscle in the body, you can never go wrong. Because when you work a chest press, you're working the shoulder and the tricep. When you're working a row, you're working the bicep. So one can build a physique and get strong just from doing those 3 or 4 movements. We tend to do a little bit more bicep, a little bit more tricep, because we want to do more isolated movements. The squat, even though you're not raising your heels, it's still going to put load on the calf because you're putting all that weight going down. So the calf's going to be contracted coming up. So for me, those are your variables of those 4 compound movements.
Right. So thank you, Sir Jonathan Park, for giving a valuable time. And from the last interview for 2 days, you have given so much valuable information to every audience that is listening. So thank you for that. And I personally say that you should open your own YouTube channel. People can learn a lot from you, a lot when it comes to nutrition.
I am actually thinking about it, and I'm planning on it. I'm not quite there yet, but in time I will be. So yes, I agree with you. I just want to make sure that it's done properly. My whole thing, Suvik, is when I meet with a client, is to help them to train effectively to get them into better shape than they're in, to get them into the shape that they desire. And my goal is to teach them to do it effectively with preferably no risk of injury. Can I guarantee that they're not going to get injured? No, because it depends on what age group they come to me and what their history is. And I can't be responsible for watching every single thing they do if they're not training with me all the time, or if they forget to tell me they've had an injury and I haven't taken that into consideration. But also on top of that is to educate them as much as possible in the process. Because the more educated they are, the safer they're going to be. Because I want my clients to be able to work out on their own without relying on me if they happen to be traveling. And now that we're able to train online, I can train them wherever they go. So there's no excuse for that. But if they happen to want to train at a different time that's not on the same time zone as what I am, they can walk into a gym, and even though it may not have exactly what they're used to using, at least they will have the confidence and ability to know their way around. And that for me is important. It's an education process.
So thank you, Sir Jonathan Park, for giving a valuable time and letting me hand this interview. That's it for the video. Please like, share, and subscribe. And also, don't forget to check out Sir Jonathan Park's Instagram handle. You will get a lot of information from there. Thank you, sir, for being and giving this interview. Thank you.